Invisible Soldiers Podcast.
Welcome to the Invisible Soldiers Podcast. I'm Corey.
I'm Rebecca.
And as hosts, we're currently gaining a lot of momentum in these podcast streets. Today, we're talking to John Castman. After a successful 12-year career in advertising, John pivoted to an entirely different industry. John is currently a real estate entrepreneur and content creator, and he's partnered with investors on over 900 units in multifamily valued at nearly $90 million. John, welcome to the pod.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Excited to be here today.
Long time coming, man. Long time coming.
I love it. So let's get into it. We're really excited again to have you. The wonderful thing about this podcast is that 100 years ago, the three of us actually were all in the same building. So we're so excited to get it going. And from there, you got your start in advertising, interning, and specifically at Campbell Ewald. Can you talk a little bit about how you got your internship and your time there?
Yeah, listen, I absolutely started with my internship at Campbell Ewald. It was a crazy time, a great time. And one of the, most fun, exciting, and also challenging times I've ever had. I got my internship through the 4As. They had a program called MAPE, the Multicultural Advertising Intern Program. I applied for this program. I remember actually it was in December. I realized that in order to get jobs in corporate America, you usually have to have some experience. And when you're in college, that experience typically comes from being an intern. I didn't really know that up until really my senior year. So I was like, oh, crap, I better go find something. And I ended up applying. I did not get into MAPE initially. There was a day they were going to make phone calls. I did not get a phone call. About 3 days went by, still no phone call. A week went by. And then finally, I got a call. And they said, hey, we've got a spot open in Detroit. Are you interested? Detroit was not one of the cities that I selected to intern at. But nonetheless, I also recognized that I was also not their first choice. Clearly, multiple people had turned the program down or turned down the city of Detroit. And I was probably someone's like fifth or sixth option. They finally said, oh, let's get this kid a try. So I ended up taking that internship. I also came into it kind of with a chip on my shoulder, recognizing that I wasn't the first choice. I didn't really have anything on my resume that would have stood out and made someone realize that I may be a valuable asset. So I approached it very diligently. I bought a bunch of books. I read very frequently. I tried to learn everything I could learn about advertising, and I tried to be a sponge. And Corey was gracious enough to open up his door and, share information, not just Corey, but Corey in particular. And I tried to learn from everybody, who would be willing to teach, both learning from books and reading, but also from real world people.
I'm glad you brought that up because that summer, I always had a soft spot for new Black hires and Black interns because we worked in an environment, 1,000 people in the building. It was easy to get kind of lost in that mix kind of a thing. And I definitely sought you guys out. I left my door open, but you were one of the people who did not hesitate to chop it up. You were in my office that whole summer. We kicked it and had a good time and just had a lot of meaningful talks. From the beginning, you were all about networking and seeking information. Who helped you develop that skill? And can you tell us just how that's paid off for you?
It's interesting. I'm not sure if there was a person who helped me develop that as much as a realization that and quite frankly, I don't want to say humility. What I mean is I actually recognize one of my biggest weaknesses is I did not have the network necessary to succeed. I did not have the networking skills. So for me, the fact that you were willing to open your door and say, hey, young fella, not just me, but the rest of my cohorts, you said, hey, if you guys want to talk, come here. And I recognized the competition. And just to set the stage, at that time, we were all told that they were only keeping one intern.
Mm.
It was an internship, but they said there's one spot at the end of the summer, there's one job. So I treated that internship like a competition. I looked at everyone, I sized them up, and that's the way I approached it. It was fun. We all worked hard, but it never left my mind that, one, you were the last choice. Not only that, I was the only MAPE intern. So everyone else, Campbell Ewald selected directly. I was selected through this diversity program. So I really didn't feel like, I was the chosen one. So for me, there was a huge chip on my shoulder. So I tried to just learn from anywhere I could. And like I said, Corey is one of those people who opened his door to me. And I think for me, it was more that mindset of competing. And that came from wrestling, being in a room and just being able to compete. And it's you and no one else. There's no team to blame. There's no quarterback didn't help. They didn't pass the ball. It's you. So I tried to do everything I could to be successful. And ultimately that led to some great wins.
So was there anything you learned that summer that really helped you moving forward?
Corey, man, one of the things that's crazy, and I say this on other podcasts, so it's not just because I'm talking to you. You said something to me that really stuck, really stuck. You were had just come back from a shoot. I think it was Chevy had just launched some car, but you had just come back from a shoot. And keep in mind, not only am I an intern, but man, I've probably been on one plane in my life at that point, right? So I'm excited. I'm like, wait, what? You're telling us about the shoot, and you flew out to Cali. You're at this nice hotel, and you got, all of this fun stuff, right? And all of us, we're just sitting in your office like little kids, and just licking it all up and imagining the day when we get to go on our first photo shoot or TV shoot. And I think at some point you looked at us and realized that we were almost too excited, and we didn't realize the work that went into this. And you pulled out your business card and you said, listen, there are great perks in this industry, by all means. Absolutely. That's one of the reasons we do this job. But remember that they didn't give this to Corey. They gave this to the creative director, the copywriter for Campbell Ewald. I just happen to be in this chair at this time. But if I'm not in this seat, someone else is getting this. You don't want to hustle and get these perks because of the title you hold. You want to get it because of your name. And that stood out to me because even when I left, and I know we'll talk about this, but when I left and I went client side, I watched so many people who believed the things they got were because of them. I'm such and such. And they approached their job that way because their title gave them power, but they didn't realize it was just a title and it wasn't real. It wasn't tied to them. That next person who held that title gets those same benefits. So I just always kept that in mind. And as I watched people who came into power recognize, is the power really them? Or is it the title that they have or the chair that they happen to be sitting in?
Wow, that is really, really impactful and something that we talk about all the time in terms of navigating the next step or your next play and thinking about how you've been able to create these relationships and again, your name being spoken in rooms. You made a transition on the client side. Can you talk a little bit about how you decided to do that and kind of what that felt like coming from agency and now jumping into the big ocean?
Yeah, I mean, that was one that certainly wasn't planned. I was finished up my fellowship program. So the short story is I did the internship. I went home because my family was launching a group home. So I went home to launch that. Can't believe I'd actually stayed in touch and I got a call. I feel like it was once a month. And I was actually hitting a very rough point because I was running this group home and making $0. So I had no money coming in. And I'm sitting in this cold house because I couldn't afford to have the heat on in the winter while I was trying to get our license together and all this other stuff. I got a call and Campbell Ewald invited me to come back. They had this fellowship program, so I was a participant in that. And ultimately, I went to Chicago and did really well there. And I had planned on staying in Chicago when I got a phone call, and it was one of my old colleagues, and she said, "Hey, General Motors is very interested in hiring you, and they want you to apply for this position." I was really surprised because I did not apply. I hadn't talked to anybody at GM in over a year, but my name came up. I thought about it and said, you know what? I think I would regret not trying to see what this could be. So I flew in for the interview and ended up, getting a job at GM.
Very cool. Rebecca talked kind of before we did this interview about how your name was bubbling in a lot of different spaces when it came to recruiters and everything. And, I'm going to fast forward through your career a little bit, but you had a lot of success. In your last role, you were group business director for 1035, working on brands like Bacardi, USA, Nike, PepsiCo. At that point in your career, you seem to be on top of the world. You are getting to the spaces and to the levels that you want to get. And then you left. So I just want to know, because we spent a lot of time scratching and clawing to get up that ladder, right?
Yeah.
To be making such progress and getting to the places that you want to go and then to pull that ripcord. Talk about the thinking. Is it something that you saw in the industry or outside the industry that led you to making that decision?
It's all of the above, but it also goes back to that quote you told me, Corey. I mean, literally, when I talk about the impact it had, I recognize that, again, all of those things are for that title. So I can be group account director, I can be vice president of this, or I can be CMO or whatever it is. But all those perks go to that title. And what happened was, from my time at Campbell Ewald to my time at General Motors, one thing that I noticed was, and this is true for everyone, right? You look up at that next title or a couple titles up and say, okay, I can't wait to be this. I can't wait to be account manager. I can't wait to be account director. I can't wait to be vice president. And that's what we set our eyes on. We work hard. We shoot for those goals. When you start looking at the people in those seats, I want you to ask yourself, are those people happy?
Ding, 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 ding.
When I started looking at those people, I realized they weren't happy as an intern. I remember they had they had us all sit in the room and we got to ask questions to, like, I don't know, like the group account director or whatever it was. And I remember someone asking about work-life balance. And this is admittedly maybe 15, almost 20 years ago now. But someone asked about work-life balance. And the response was, listen, it was murky at best, but I think that the person hesitated when they talked about how old their kid was. They couldn't even remember how old their kid was. And this is someone
Wow.
who worked at least 60 or 70 hours a week. And I think I was like, is that really what you want?
Right.
When I was at GM, and again, you talk about a big company, corporate environment, being on the client side, listen, there was a lot to like. But when I really started paying attention to, like, who's happy here? It wasn't my director leads. It wasn't the vice presidents. It wasn't any of those people. There's a guy named Jack. Jack was happy. Jack came to work with a smile every day, had a joke for you, shook everybody's hand in the morning. Jack lived a great life. Jack was a product manager. Jack did not want to get promoted beyond that. He was real happy. He loved his job. He didn't want to do anything more. When 4:30 rolled around, Jack shut down his computer. He was out. Okay. Jack had a life, and Jack had investments outside of his job. Jack owned real estate across the country. He had a big farm. He had some other stuff he was doing. So Jack didn't have to work for money. Jack was the only person I could look at, and he was happy. Another thing that really happened was I was at GM when we went through bankruptcy. And because of that, you can imagine the level of anxiety that everyone felt. I remember watching my boss's boss's boss, right? So 3 levels up, saw her in the hallway, and it just said, hey, obviously a lot going on here. What should we do? Like, what should I do? She said, John, don't worry about it. Just keep your head down and do your job. Okay. Well, guess what? 3 hours later, watching CNN, and she shows up on there and she says, if we don't sell 15 or 16 million vehicles as an industry, we're in deep trouble. Well, guess what? That's really hard to, when you have these mixed messages, you go on live news and tell us if we don't sell a certain amount of cars, who knows what's going to happen? We're in trouble. But you tell me just keep my head down. Like, you'd have to be an idiot to just sit there and keep your head down. So I just kept looking around and saying, man, you've got to figure something else out. And while I was trying to figure that out, I remember reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And that book talked a lot about being able to create your own success. And that was through creating assets and, accumulating assets. And that was something that I started really thinking hard about. I was like, okay, I need to get some stuff outside of my job. And then the last piece was that same boss who, again, I don't know if you all recall, but there was a time when we were going through bankruptcy or right before that, all the CEOs flew down to Washington and they got
Yes.
ripped for flying private jets, right?
Yeah, that was a big deal.
That was the last time they let that CEO show his face for anything public. And after that, it was my boss's boss's boss. She was the public face moving forward. And for that service she gave to the company, once they brought in a new CEO, he apparently didn't really like her as much, or the CMO didn't like her as much. And they moved her to Shanghai. So she moved her family from California to Detroit. And within 3 years, she went from California to Detroit to Shanghai. And I asked myself, is this what you want to sign up for? At any moment, you're just not someone's guy. And they decide they want to ship you halfway across the world. At that moment, I realized I didn't want to be in a world where I didn't have control. So as my career ascended and I got promoted, part of what I always paid attention to was how much control do I have over my life. As time went on, especially as you get bigger and bigger jobs, bigger and bigger responsibilities, you may not have that control. And for me, it was always starting to work on that plan B and that exit plan, which was real estate. So I started investing in real estate as soon as I got to Chicago for the most part. Once I left GM and went back to the agency side, I started investing in real estate. And I got to the point where I could transition and go full time as opposed to staying in my day job.
That's an amazing story. And actually, right before you jumped on this afternoon, Corey and I were talking a little bit about back then, 10, 15 years ago, even 20 years ago, there was no one talking about a side hustle, right? Your time was completely owned by the agency or
Hmm.
client that had you in that particular or specific seat. Now, fast forward 20 years later, you hear all the people talk. In fact, I don't even think it was socially okay to have more than one interest other than your job, right? It was, Jack is a very interesting person because it was rare. I never heard of anyone leaving the office early. In fact, Corey and I were joking about how we used to go into the office on Saturdays,
Yeah.
right? And so, can you talk to us a little bit about how you managed your time, how you went from high level in the industry? You obviously had to carve out a little bit of time, I assume, to study, to learn, to get into real estate. Can you talk a little bit about that journey that put you into the position where you could say, all right, I'm going to close my computer at GM or wherever, and now I'm 100% focused on my own journey?
Well, company culture is really important. And to your point at CE, that was not a fault, right? I wanted to stay as late as humanly possible when I was an intern. Again, it was a competitive internship. So for me, I felt like people were always keeping score. If I took a longer lunch, I'm like, well, I'm definitely going to make sure I'm just here as long as possible because I don't want people to feel like I'm not up for it, right? So I think the company culture is key. At GM, there was a little more flexibility because most people just day ended at 5 for most people. If you had something else you were working on, you could stay or whatever. So we did that. When I got to the agency side, one of the things that was really helpful for me, and this was very intentional, I didn't just go to an agency. I wanted to work in a place where it could be more entrepreneurial. So I specifically sought out a smaller agency, an agency where I could talk to the CEO, where he kind of understood that my real long term vision was to be an entrepreneur myself. So that was a very intentional thing. And that also created a company culture that allowed me to have different interests. With that said, I didn't share those interests right away. A lot of that was kind of my own thing on the side and things that I would work on. But it did get to the point where it became pretty common knowledge as I would look to grow that business. One of the best things that I did was start figuring out how can I grow. So that was attending events, which were usually in the evening, networking events, reading, listening to podcasts like this, and really starting to surround myself with other people who were in that space. When I started actually investing, well, then it was, well, how do I manage this stuff, right? So trying to create systems and processes so that I wasn't getting pulled out of meetings because an AC unit went out. So I had to figure out what does that look like. So I had my residents send an email. If it was urgent, send me a text message, right? If there's water pouring out somewhere, text me or call me. If it's not water coming out somewhere, if the building's not on fire, shoot me an email. I'll respond to it within 12 hours. So that process worked out fairly well for us. My wife and I kind of worked and managed the same email account so we could both kind of keep eyes on it. But the education is key. And those evenings, I had to spend more time learning and investing that time to learn a little bit more about the industry, investing rules, attending these events, and all of that just it paid off dividends. But I took the time to invest in myself and invest in the learning. And when it was time to actually grow and scale in that space, I was ready.
In real estate, there are a lot of different ways to get involved, right? I got a buddy, he's into fixer uppers, right? Long term rentals, fixer uppers. I'm a little bit more into Airbnb property, vacation rental kind of thing, right? You got into this multifamily, I follow you on social media. So I've seen like these huge apartment units that you acquire. Can you talk about how specifically you got into the multifamily space? The people who you partner with to get the investments, and can you get a little more detailed into like really what you do?
Yeah, so I'll go back to networking, right? It's so important to just continue to learn and to be around people who are playing the game at a higher level. So as I was building my own portfolio, which is really a 2 unit, then a 3 unit building, one of the things I realized was that I really needed to scale into larger commercial properties. And larger didn't mean to me 100 plus units at that time. It just meant, hey, we need to get to like 10 or 15 or 20 units. I didn't have the money for that. And I think that's one of the things that most people would recognize is like, well, hey, that sounds good, but how do you get the money? So I didn't have the money. And I realized that one of the best ways to scale was going to be to partner with someone else, right? To raise that money or partner with someone else. When I would go to these networking events, I remember meeting this guy and he owned hundreds of units. And I just thought he was super rich, right? Like he just woke up and made a bunch of money somehow and that's how he got it. One day I asked him, I said, hey, if you don't mind me asking, how did you come across all these units? And he said, well, I have investors. And at that moment, it dawned on me like, oh, I guess that makes sense, right? If you don't have to have all the money, well, then you can work with investors. So that gentleman, we sat down, I had a coffee meeting with him, and he kind of laid it out for me. And in short, Corey, you talked about, your investing strategy, your friend's investing strategy. If you think about just the three of us, right? Just you, Rebecca, and me, let's say we all have $100,000 to go out there and buy a property. Well, you can go out there and buy whatever you can get for 100,000. Maybe that's a $300,000 property. Maybe it's a $400,000 property, but that's what you're going to be looking at. But if the three of us pool our money together, now we've got $300,000. Now we can probably go out there and buy a $900,000 property or $1 million property. And we can run it like a company, right? We can have one person still managing it. We can all work together. There's different ways of doing it. So you take that concept and then you multiply those numbers. What if we had 10 people add $100,000, right? Now we've got $1 million to go out there and buy. Well, now we can buy a $3 or $4 million property. And that's essentially what our business is now, is that I work with other investors who want to get in real estate, who want to get all the benefits of real estate investing without the headaches of being a landlord themselves, or maybe they don't have the experience to be a landlord themselves. So we take the lead, we find the property, we raise money from these investors, and then we go out and then we buy and manage these assets. So the proper term is apartment syndication. We've helped people invest in over $100 million worth of properties. And the biggest thing for me on that transition was really just learning the things that I didn't know. So once we had that 3 unit, I bought an 8 unit building with my wife and I, just our money. And we hired a third party management company. So I had to learn how to manage other people, how to manage the property management company. And then from there, I hired a mentor. I wanted someone who could teach me how to raise money. I had never raised a dollar at that point. I just saved everything we had. So I hired a mentor and he kind of walked me through the process of raising money, the legality, what's necessary. All this is filed with the SEC. So I've got to have all our paperwork together. So going through all of those steps and processes, from there, the networking is key to have people who believe in you. And Rebecca, it's interesting because I think you said some great things about, my name getting a buzz. For most people, you don't know what people are saying about you. You don't know how people think about you. They may come up and tell you, oh, you did a great job, or you're this or you're that. But generally speaking, you don't know what the general perception of you is. You hope it's a good thing, right? We all want to be wanted. We all want to do a good job, right? But we don't know that. So if you really want to test that, go raise $1 million for a deal and see how much people really like and trust you, right? So fortunately, people, they believed in me. They believed and they trusted, and that helped me believe in myself, right? Because it's tough. It sounds crazy to tell a kid who has never raised money, never really had that kind of a network, to go out there and do something. But when people believe in you and you believe in yourself, but you also put in the work, right? You put in the work, and that made it really possible. So that was huge for us to be able to work with people, share what we're doing, share why we're doing what we're doing, but also get those successes and those wins so they can believe in the final product.
So when we think about advertising, it is so specific. Corey and I were just talking about, we've been in this industry collectively 40 plus years, and the circle is quite small. Again, the three of us in the same building at the same time, and we didn't even know it. Do you think that there were some skills that you learned on the ad side, on the client side, that you've been able to transition into the new industry of real estate and the success that you've seen now?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the great things about advertising is, first of all, no 2 days are alike. You're going to have timeline pressures, you're going to have client issues, you're going to have creative issues. You're talking about an intangible product, right? Ideas. So the articulation of ideas and hitting strategies and the differing points of views there, being able to navigate that, I think, is key from a negotiation standpoint, or at least understanding, what people are looking for. That skill was absolutely developed through the advertising industry, but also project management. Understanding, okay, hey, we've got to get this thing up on air in 3 weeks. How do we, get this scheduled out? What do we need to get? Okay, like understanding all of those things was key for us. So it's very similar in real estate. If you're trying to do a renovation or you're trying to get a project done, those timelines of being able to manage people who may not speak your language, that's key. And sometimes literally, right? If you've got construction crews who don't speak English, you're gonna have to figure out how to convey that message to them and make sure they're all working in the same timeline. So that was absolutely critical to transition. And then when it comes to working with investors, for me, that's great because it comes down to, again, account management, understanding what clients are looking for, understanding what our investors are looking for, being able to communicate to them. And that's one of the things that I felt I did a pretty good job of in the corporate world. And it certainly crosses over into what I do in real estate. Because at the end of the day, our investors are investing with us and they want to know what's going on with the project. They want to know that we're doing everything we can to make sure the project is successful. But we also have to convey sometimes challenging news. The market changes a little bit or things may not go according to plan. So we've got to stay on top of that, right? No one wants to be left in the dark. So that's part of what we focus on as well. And all those skills were absolutely honed through advertising.
Another thing I like about what you've been doing is you've put yourself in front of the camera to share the information. I mean, you've cultivated quite the social media presence with your content, and you're providing financial and investment tips. I really love the content. I love how you break it out. It's simple. It's easy. I'm learning. I'm learning tips from you every day, and you don't even know it. How did you add that in front of the camera skill to your portfolio of things that you have been becoming good at?
Sometimes you develop a skill and you don't know when it's going to come back to help you. But in college, I actually hosted a radio show.
Word. Okay.
Yeah, I had a radio show, it was WWSU 106.9, the right choice. So that helped me tremendously just really get out of myself because I was kind of a shy kid. That helped me get comfortable. And I realized I was fine behind a mic. I was a little more nervous in front of a camera, but I was okay behind a mic.
Okay.
And that made me a little more comfortable. And the reality is, and I'll go back to what I talked about as an intern, I didn't have the network I thought I had to raise big money for these deals. So if you don't have that network, your only other option is to go find or create that network. And getting in front of the camera, doing social media, that was my way of expanding my network, sharing my story with people and sharing my knowledge with other folks who may have interest. That's the best thing I think you can do is, we call it being a thought leader, but really when it comes to being a thought leader, it's about sharing the information you have and trying to connect with other people who are interested in the same story. So for me, launching my podcast, getting in front of, social media, doing some video recordings, that has allowed me to expand my network and find the folks who are interested in either partnering together or working together in some other capacity. The one other thing that you mentioned, Corey, which I think is spot on for me, I was still hesitant to do more video and sharing more of my story from that standpoint because a lot of people, want to build in private, right? You want to make your money and not necessarily tell everybody all the deals you're doing and stuff like that. But what's important and what I realize is there are a lot of people in my network who don't know about real estate, how they can invest in real estate, just don't know about other ways of making passive income or making money. And I felt like it would be very selfish of me to spend the hours that I've spent learning about passive income, real estate investing, apartment syndication, all these different things, and not share that information with other people. They can get value out of it. And whether they take action or not, it's something that they can get exposed to. These are things that I was not exposed to. We talked about, having a side hustle and not being exposed to that early in the career. It's the same thing, right? We've got to expose people to the options on the table so that they can create a path that works for them. And particularly for minorities and business professional minorities, that was the one thing that really surprised me. I was a part of the Chicago Urban League's Impact program. And when I started talking to some of my Impact classmates, many of them just were not in a position to invest, either through financial reasons or educational reasons. These are the people who have done everything we're told to do, right? Go to college, get a good job, get a good career, all of them doing that. Yet various circumstances haven't put them in a position to grow and take advantage of, the capital that they have earned. And I think the thing that jumps out to me is when you're done working, what do you have left? All you really have are your assets, right? When you stop working, that check stops. So if you don't have assets that can generate income for you, then you don't have anything. You can't give your job title to your kids. I wasn't going to be able to be VP group account director and then hand that to my kids and let them, start on third base. But I can give them a house, my assets, my investments. I can share that with them, right? And that goes back to what we talked about with hustling for your name, not your title. And that's why accumulating assets is so critical. And that's what I want to share with people is regardless if you ever invest with us or in real estate, you got to accumulate assets, take that income, invest in assets, and then you have power. You have the power to sell those assets, to leverage those assets. But that's what you want to do. And there are people who make $300,000, $400,000 a year, but they have no assets. So if they lose that job or can't keep working, they don't have anything to share with their family.
Yeah, it's interesting. Rebecca and I talk about this all the time. We were raised by baby boomers. And, I think because of the struggle that they fought through desegregation and all of that, what was really important to them that they shared with us was education and having a job, right? And we made that very important to us. But what I've learned, and I've made myself, as I've gotten further in my career, learn is that there's nothing wrong with having a job, but you need to be the boss of something, right? There needs to be something that you have the control of that has your name, and it's about what you're going to do with it. Man, this has been great. Do you have any last parting words or advice for the people that we know are out there in advertising who are either burnt out, tired, scared, tired of feeling like, somebody's going to walk in the room and hand them a pink slip? Do you have any parting words for those people?
Two quick things. So one, Corey, we talked about that side hustle. One thing that also stood out to me, and I didn't think about it until just now, you were one of the first people I saw who kind of openly shared their other passions, man. You were a poet, right? And I remember coming out and watching your show, again, as an intern, and most people didn't share those other passions, and you did. And that also kind of gave me, I wasn't as creative, I wish I was, but it kind of gave me the permission to have other interests outside of my day job. And it's okay, especially if it helped me with my day job. So I just want to say that too, is like, if you have other passions, embrace that, because you don't want to just be a person who goes to your job, works 40, 50, 60 hours, and then goes home. Have something else that excites you so that you can stay energized. As far as parting words for those folks who maybe are getting a little burned out, one of the big things to me was to really understand what I was shooting for and striving for. And success comes down to however you define it. If it's a title and a job, great. If it's money, okay. But you should think about the kind of person you want to be as well. One of the things that I defined very early on is I wanted to be a present father. And I define success as having the flexibility to be at my kid's baseball game or soccer game or whatever it was, whenever it was and wherever it was. And that may seem silly because there's not a monetary amount put to it. But if I could control me leaving and being at my kid's game at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that to me was success. That comes from being able to control your time and time freedom. And if you can do that and define it for yourself, now you can create kind of the rules that you're going to play with. But you got to have passion and have a little bit of a chip. And there's certainly things that aren't going to go your way. But be really clear on what success looks like, because there are a lot of people who have great fancy titles and big salaries who are absolutely miserable. I would implore you to really work on understanding yourself, being honest with yourself, and striving for success the way you define it.
Wow.
Brilliant.
That was a word.
It was. And thank you for confirming that you can manifest your dreams. We appreciate you joining us today, John. Can you tell us where we can find you, where we should listen to you? Please shout out your socials for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So on social media, I'm pretty active on both LinkedIn and Instagram. It's John Casmon, John Casmon on LinkedIn. And then on Instagram is at JCasmon, so JCASMON. And then if anyone's interested in real estate investing or multifamily investing, we do have some content and some resources available on our website. Just go to CasmonCapital.com.
We love it. We love it. Thank you to you again. And to everyone tuning in, continue to support the Invisible Soldiers podcast wherever you listen to podcasts.
Peace.
Peace.